I spoke earlier of how the shadow-possessed psyche sends out a resonant signal, for want of a better word, which attracts this Antichrist spirit. The inner demons attract the outer demons. I don't think I need to tell you that our minds have an effect on the world around us. You already know this. Most of you will know exactly what I mean when I talk about the personal synchronicities that we all experience, the type of synchronicities that involve our own thoughts reflecting back at us. You might be researching something related to a specific subject, let's say it involves bees for instance, and suddenly, everywhere you go, you keep having bee-related synchronicities. You walk past the TV and bees are mentioned, or you're busy writing something down when the radio or the TV's on in the background, and just as you write the word bee, someone on the radio mentions bees. You might be outside, you're thinking about bees, and a lorry passes just at that moment with a bee logo on the side. These are personal synchronicities, as opposed to collective synchronicities, and to the negative synchronicities used by the Antichrist spirit to gaslight you with directed conversation. These personal synchronicities are basically the result of an imprint in your own field. There's nothing bad about that, it's perfectly natural. We all have different imprints depending on what occupies our thoughts, what kind of psyches we have, and what our own higher selves may wish to communicate to us in various symbolic ways, which will be imprinted in your field, specifically to bounce back at you synchronistically in order to nudge you, let's say, in a certain direction, or to call your attention to something. So your own imprint naturally affects reality. In other words, we all have a natural signal. And it's tangible in the sense that it's immediately recognisable when it happens. Well, this same signal is the one the Antichrist consciousness, the demonic, if you will, uses to read you. If you have an imprint that matches its own state of being, its nature, meaning that you are made in its image, then it can possess you. If, on the other hand, it recognises something in your field that it can latch onto, some weakness caused by your own inner shadow, then it will attempt to torment and gaslight you. Just as shadow projection works at a physical level, where you unconsciously project your shadow onto different people, it works also on a non-physical level, where that shadow imprint on your field projects onto reality in a synchronistic fashion. That is what the demonic picks up on. You're like a lighthouse to the Antichrist spirit. This doesn't in any way make you a bad person. It just means that there's something in your field, from your psyche, that you need to work on. The Antichrist spirit likes nothing better than taking good people and trying to get them to do bad things. Now, what I said about your imprint, how the thoughts that occupy your mind bounce back at you synchronistically, that's important for what I'm about to tell you. When this Antichrist consciousness targets you and sends its vessels, aka the perps, to gaslight you, one of its goals is to artificially imprint your field in order to simulate its own gaslighting technique, using your own field against you. So it's like I said earlier, it will have the perps gaslight you in a specific way, maybe involving a certain item of clothing, a hand gesture, or even coughing. And it will keep doing this until you become paranoid and keep thinking about it. Because as soon as that happens, you have an imprint in your field, and that imprint will do all the work for the Antichrist spirit. The perps won't have to cough at you, for instance, because your own shadow will work against you, and it will project that imprint onto reality, meaning all of a sudden, people who are in no way perps or guilty of any wrongdoing are going to start coughing around you, simply because your own field imprint is attracting it. Once the imprint is created, the Antichrist spirit will gaslight you in other ways, and it will create more imprints. It wants you to lash out. It wants you to accuse random strangers of stalking you, and ultimately, It wants you to hurt, attack, or worst case scenario, kill someone. Anything it can do to isolate you, it will. Anything it can do to make you act outside of your true nature, it will. Don't take the bait. Now, there is another thing that demons, psychopaths, abusers, and gang stalkers all have in common. Perhaps the most obvious thing of all, and that is their ability to sniff out the perfect victim, the perfect candidate for their gaslighting and abuse. You want to know why they can do this? For exactly the reason I just talked about. Because they can read your field imprint. Psychopaths, abusers, gang stalkers, and demons are all the same thing. They are all of the same Antichrist spirit, this hive mind. They can see you coming from a mile away. Like I said, our fields are like a lighthouse to these beings. They can tell a lot about a person's nature just by looking at the person's field. Now, if I were to hazard a guess, I would say that the field may be multi-layered. And I will bet that there were 7 of these layers in all. It could be that these layers of the field are what the chakras represent. So an entity that wanted to possess a person would first have to penetrate the outer layer, which corresponds to the crown chakra, presumably. Having achieved that, it would then move on to the next layer, which would be the third eye. And it may attack you in your dreams on this layer and attempt to trick you into allowing it access to the next layer down, which corresponds to the throat chakra. Once inside this throat chakra layer, the layer of communication, then it can contact you and it can attack you via voice to skull. It will do everything in its power at this stage to break your will. It may try to fill you with suicidal or homicidal thoughts. At times it may even be nice to you, but that may be based wholly on the condition that you do what it asks you to do. Following this stage is the final layer that it needs to penetrate if possession is its goal. And that is the heart, your centre. It would need permission before penetrating this level, of course, and this would presumably come as a result of just giving up, giving in to the entity after the torment becomes too much. So, 4 layers in all are breached, corresponding to the crown, third eye, throat, and the heart chakras. But of course, there are 7 of these layers in all, if my theory is correct. So it would be rather silly of me to neglect the remaining 3 layers, which correspond to the bottom 3 chakras, the solar plexus, the navel, and the root. If my idea is correct, then the heart chakra being the centre, its corresponding layer would be more a combination of the top 3 and the bottom 3 united in a polarity to form one from 2 opposites. In the same way as Jachin and Boaz, or Severity and Mercy, when combined form the middle pillar. Meaning the heart chakra is more a result of the top 3 chakras combined with the bottom 3 chakras. Logically it follows that one set of 3 is the positive pole, the out, while the other set of 3 is the negative pole, the in. Since our layers are layers of a torus-shaped field, we must now account for the fact that if these 7 layers are just stacked on top of or overlaying each other, and the crown is the outermost layer, then the root would be the innermost layer, closest to the centre. But that cannot be correct, as we know that the heart is the centre. So I can only conclude that there are in fact 3 layers of the torus field. Now at the top, they would go in, at which point they are negative, and at the bottom, they come out, at which point they are positive. This would mean that the crown and the root are essentially the same. Both the crown and the root are negative and positive expressions of that same outermost layer. Naturally, this means that the above is the below, and the below is the above. Just as Kepha is in Melkaf, and Melkaf is in Kepha. They're the same. The 3 layers I talked about are in truth not layers at all, so much as they are fractals. The crown slash root is the outer fractal. The third eye slash navel is the next in. The throat slash solar plexus after that. And finally, the heart in the center. 3 layers or fractals, each with its own positive and negative poles. So let's go through this. The outer layer is at the top the crown and the bottom the root. The crown and the root are the negative and the positive poles of this outer layer, this outer field, and correspond directly to each other, as above, so below. The very top is a reflection of the very bottom. The crown is negative, as it exists to receive the Holy Spirit. It is the in. The root is positive, as it exists to discharge energy into the ground, to ground you. It is the out. One is your roots in spirit, the crown, and the other is your roots into the ground. Now the second layer, or second field, more accurately fractal, is the third eye above and the navel below. The third eye is the window to the spirit. It is passive in the sense that the eye receives light and it must be open to receive the Holy Spirit. Thus it is negative. It is the in. The navel chakra is like the basement standing on the strong foundation of the ground being the root chakra in this case. It is active in that it generates creativity, goals, dreams, aspirations, and fantasy. So it is the positive pole and direct opposite of the third eye, in that an eye receives a vision from the external to the internal, whereas the navel generates a vision from the internal and projects that vision onto the external, in the sense that a vision that is internal could, for example, become a painting that is external. So it's positive in nature. It is the out to the third eye's in. The next fractal down is the throat chakra above and the solar plexus below. The throat chakra is negative, as it's about being flexible in order to receive truth. Truth guides it. Truth is the potter that shapes the clay, so to speak. The solar plexus chakra below is positive. The solar plexus is active because it provides the clay in the form of the authentic personality, self-esteem and willpower, all of which it builds. So, the clay is made by the solar plexus chakra and shaped by the truth in the throat chakra. These two chakras have a symbiotic relationship in that one makes the clay while the other shapes the clay with the truth that it has received. Objective truth is received while subjective truth is given from the inside to the outside. The will projects its subjective unique expression, while conversely, from the outside to the inside, the truth shapes with objective unique expression. The solar plexus chakra gives subjective truth, while the throat chakra is open to receive objective truth. It is for good reason that these two pillars, these positive and negative poles of subjective and objective truth, stand either side of the heart chakra. On my model, the heart is the fourth layer or fractal, enveloped within the very centre of the third layer, like a baby in the womb. This womb of subjective and objective truth protects the heart in the centre. It is essential that they operate correctly. The throat chakra is, like I said, flexible by necessity. If it were rigid and dogmatic, then it would shatter into a million pieces every time the truth hit it, which would make for a very painful experience and cause the heart chakra to flip into oversensitivity. It is flexible in order to receive truth and reject lies. which, due to its flexible nature, bounce back off of it. That's why offence is taken, not given. The rigid take offence because the truth hurts them, whereas lies comfort them. Nothing bounces back off of them. They're inflexible. They cannot protect the heart from oversensitivity because they can't take the truth. Only offence. On the opposite side, the solar plexus chakra, subjective truth, keeps the heart sensitive enough to empathise with others because it has strong will. It knows what it wants and what it doesn't want. It has boundaries, thus it can respect the boundaries of others. If it had no integrity and it just tried to fit in with the world around it, then it would have no real convictions or principles with which the heart could build boundaries. So the heart would become insensitive. If on the other hand it set its standards too high and then beat itself up when it couldn't meet those standards, it would cause the heart to become oversensitive, just like the inflexible throat chakra, when it takes offence instead of taking the truth. And of course, the throat chakra can go too far in the other direction and become too malleable as well. These are the type of people who just walk around responding to stimuli in the environment. They are authentic in that they're genuine, but they're easily misled, which often results in a completely unintentional insensitivity due to a lack of thinking. Not the kind of malice-driven insensitivity that the underactive solar plexus chakra can give rise to, but more of an absent-minded type of insensitivity. So that is why the heart sits in between the two poles of the throat and the solar plexus. The top three chakras are negative and the bottom three are positive. 3 layers or fractals in all on my model. Each a polarity between one of the positive and one of the negative chakras. The fourth is the heart, which is equilibrium in the centre of everything. Now, demonologists will tell you that there are 3 primary stages of possession. Some may add a fourth, which they will call manifestation, and that's just the initial appearance and the invitation process that brings the demon into your life in the first place. But the 3 primary stages, though, are as follows: infestation, oppression, and possession. Infestation is the demon doing the usual gaslighting and parlour tricks, moving things around, messing with lights, banging on walls, and all the rest. Infestations can occur in houses, but demons are not confined to that environment. They follow people around just as gang stalkers follow people around, no matter where they go. Now the next stage is of course oppression. Oppression is when the demon begins to focus on breaking the will of the target, filling them with suicidal thoughts and despair, playing mind games and psychologically torturing them. They will affect them physically as well as mentally. As opposed to the infestation stage, this stage is far more personal, and all of the demon's energy is concentrated on breaking that one person down. Now if they can get them to kill themselves, that's a win. It doesn't necessarily follow that possession's always the end goal. Just the corruption and the destruction of the victim's soul will in many cases be enough. This stage is when personal, intimate communication between the entity and the victim begins, and they start hearing voices tormenting them. And finally, the last stage is possession. This stage needs no explaining. This is when a sociopath is made. Now, we can all argue about the validity of this 3-stage process and demonology in general, and that's fine. I fully understand that. All I'm saying is that this particular demonic MO fits the bill. The demon's manifestation corresponds to the outer field, which, as I explained, is a polarity between the crown and the root chakra. So if you're unbalanced in either of these areas, then you're vulnerable to attack. The extreme yang of the crown being those with a god complex who cast humility into the shadow. They fear not being the centre of attention. They can display false modesty, but never true modesty, because deep down they despise it and they fear it. A demon will have a field day, no pun intended, with this type of person. All they have to do is convince that person that they are special. And let's face it, it won't take much convincing. Oh, you're here to play a pivotal role in the spiritual evolution of mankind. You were sent here from insert star system to aid in the blah 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 blah. You get the point. Then there's the other extreme. The extreme yin, who cast their own divinity into the shadow. These are the types most likely to indulge in idol worship, adultery. I don't need to tell you why demons favour these types. It's obvious that demons draw energy from worship. It's a good food source for them. As for the below aspect of this field, the root chakra, it's easy to see why one not grounded in principles would be fodder for these beings. Anyone who casts their own humanity into the shadow and becomes a reflection of the demonic will despise principled people, thinking that they need to be brought down a peg or two. They will have a crab in the bucket mentality, and they will only place value in superficial things, and maybe not even that. It's all about base desires for these types, survival of the fittest. They're easy pickings for demons, because none of their chakras will function as they should. The other extreme of the root chakra, the extreme yin, are reliant on others for their survival. They cast their own agency into the shadow, and they have no control over their own life. Perfect candidates for abusers, perfect candidates for big government, and perfect candidates for demons. Just remember, what you reject in yourself, evil will compensate for. That's how it gets in. Now that covers the myriad of ways that your outer field can be damaged. As soon as the demon has penetrated your outer field, the infestation stage begins. The demon will draw its energy to perform its parlour tricks from your damaged field. See, your field is essentially a battery, complete with positive and negative. So the minute it has access to that, it's going to charge itself, so to speak. Now, electricity is generated by offsetting the balance of an atom so that it's either too far positive or too far negative. As soon as you do that, you've got your electricity. Well, it's the exact same principle with your field. The entity knocks you off balance, which automatically produces the charge that it needs. This same charge is the source of psychokinesis. Oftentimes, prepubescent teenagers tend to give off a lot of this energy, involuntarily, which can manifest itself as poltergeist-like activity. Things might occasionally fly around or move. Now, the thing about electricity is, you need to ground it. If you don't ground it, it can build up static, which tends to jump out and shock people if they happen to be nearby. So the odds are that the general principle is the same when it comes to your own field. Not being grounded spiritually will lead to a build-up of energy, which, in extreme cases, may affect your surrounding environment psychokinetically, causing things to fly around. Generally speaking, you're at your most ungrounded state right around puberty. Anyway, it is that same energy that the demon presumably feeds on, and uses to do the things that it does during the infestation stage. Now, the infestation stage happens when the entity gains access to the next field down. This is the field consisting of a polarity between the third eye above and the navel below. An imbalance in the third eye can be a lack of pattern recognition, meaning you cast both your higher and the lower discernment into the shadow, so you keep making the same mistakes and never learning, looking for light in the darkness. Well, if you do that, then sometimes the darkness will come and find you, posing as the light. That is a third eye yin imbalance. The third eye yang imbalance is an overactive pattern recognition, which when it comes to the 3 stages that we're exploring, is the favoured method, because it is an essential component of the gaslighting process. A kind of paranoid schizophrenia. Demons and gangstalkers alike go to great lengths to pull this off, so the success rate for this method's no doubt very high. Gaslighting is crazy making. meaning the target casts their ability to reason into the shadow, the natural result being paranoia, where everyone becomes a potential enemy and will be judged as such in an unreasonable way. On the below aspect of this second field is the navel chakra. When an extreme yang imbalance occurs, the result is excessive sexual fantasy and indulgence. Now this will stunt your creative energy and keep your mind stuck in the gutter. This comes as a result of casting your own creativity into the shadow. If you do that, it can come back round as an unhealthy obsession with sex in many cases, because your creativity needs an outlet. So if you don't use it, it will use you. Discipline is the key. But the trouble is, people who don't start off grounded in principles tend to cast their humanity itself into the shadow and become beasts with no discipline, which gives rise to several other chakra dysfunctions, including this one. The extreme yin imbalance is sexual repression. This ties in again with pattern recognition, as the repressed tends to see sex in everything, in the same paranoid way that the overactive third eye sees potential enemies in everything and everywhere. There seems to be something about inducing paranoia that demons find particularly useful. No doubt the excessive fear produced by an individual in such a state gives the entity a constant supply of much needed energy, so that's one aspect of it. The other being obsession. The obsessive behaviour displayed by the paranoid individual is what imprints his or her field, leading to natural synchronicities, which will be interpreted through a paranoid lens by the individual, creating an endless feedback loop. This feedback loop, born of both paranoid and obsessive behaviour, not only provides the entity with ample energy, which it draws on to perform its parlour tricks, but has the effect of alienating the individual from those around them who will be put off by the increasingly irrational behaviour of the target. So the target becomes more and more isolated. This is of course the ideal situation for the entity, in the same way that Freddy Krueger meets Sleeping Beauty would be the ideal for Freddy Krueger. Some demonologists speak of an additional stage, meaning that there are actually 4 as opposed to 3 stages. This additional stage they call obsession, which is characterised by the very traits that I am now speaking of: paranoid, irrational and obsessive behaviour. However, I don't think it's necessary to classify this as a stage in and of itself, as it's just the inevitable result of the field imprint feedback loop, and as such it is a part of the infestation stage, albeit the end part, but a part of it nonetheless. It is this feedback loop which grants the entity access to the third layer or fractal of the field. This is when the second stage begins. The second stage is oppression. As I previously said, the stage of oppression involves the demon becoming much more intimately focused on the target, bombarding them with depressing and suicidal thoughts. This also marks the stage where voices will be heard by the target, constantly harassing and tormenting them. The chakra polarity of this third field is the throat and the solar plexus combination. The throat above and the solar plexus below. We'll see now how the paranoid obsessive feedback loop created in the infestation stage damages the third field and grants the entity access. First, the throat chakra. This chakra's function is to receive objective truth. When its balance is offset into an extreme yang, the individual casts their receptivity to truth into the shadow. This goes back to the sacrifice of the inner child that I spoke of at an earlier point. When you are inflexible, which is to say rigid or dogmatic, all truth that conflicts with your worldview is painful and thus thrown out by the proverbial bouncer at the door. Now, to be fair, some truths are painful to everyone, regardless of whether or not they are receptive to it. But in most cases, we can adapt and even grow to like some of these more hard to accept truths. This rigid dogmatic state is an inevitable consequence of the paranoid obsessive feedback loop created during the infestation stage. It is precisely because this stage skewers the worldview of the target, convincing them that everyone is out to get them, that their receptivity to the objective truth is shut down, damaging the third field and granting the entity access. The target may start to believe that their friends and family are demons, and the real demon will at times facilitate this belief by causing the target to hallucinate such things. Alternatively, the target may believe that his or her friends or family are gang stalking them. They may believe that the government and black ops agents are working together with their friends and family, along with random strangers out on the street. The everyone's a perp mentality. The paranoid obsessive feedback loop will exacerbate the situation synchronistically, so the receptive function of the throat chakra is shut down, and the field is weakened. Any attempt to reason with the target will only further inflame the target's paranoia at this point, convincing the target of his or her worldview. This is how a yang imbalance of the throat chakra is engineered by the entity. The extreme yin imbalance of this chakra is characterized by impressionability, being easily led, malleable. One who is subject to an extreme yin imbalance casts independent thought into the shadow. Childlike wants the truth and asks the questions. Childish wants an answer and asks no questions. One wants to learn while the other wants to be told. Whatever they're told in a moment, they will probably accept, until someone else tells them something different, that is. They're like the kids who cheat on tests at school. Because they don't learn the answers themselves, they copy someone else's answers to pass the test, simply because they needed the answers in that moment. The only difference being, they're not consciously trying to cheat. They just lack the independent thinking skills to really question what they're hearing. Naturally, a demon would easily fool such a person. This personality type, unlike the third eye, yin imbalance types, is capable of learning from experience, but not so much at understanding the difference between a good argument and the truth. Now that covers the above aspect of the field, the negative or passive. On now to the positive or active aspect of the third field, the below, which is the solar plexus chakra. This chakra deals primarily with integrity, willpower and authenticity. Now I've already talked a great deal about the outer balance yin of this chakra and how it manifests as a lack of integrity, the social chameleon who hypocritically adopts an ideology with which to bash others over the head with, but doesn't truly believe it themselves or adhere to it. They simply use it to make it appear as if they stand for something, when really they're just hiding behind the popular opinions of the time, the contemporary dogmas. Such a person casts their selfhood into the shadow. When they see authenticity, they despise it, and they will do anything they can to stamp it out. It's not hard to see that someone who has no authentic selfhood is effectively empty. Thus they have no way of stopping a demon from wearing them like a cheap suit. Now onto the outer balance yang of this chakra. Unlike their yin counterparts, this character type are not terrible people. These types simply set unrealistic expectations for themselves, and then beat themselves up over it when they can't meet those expectations. This causes them to sink into a depression, and oftentimes social anxiety. They tend to hold other people to similar high standards, though not always as high as those that they have for themselves. Regardless of this, when others fail to meet those standards, this can cause them great distress. At worst, they can be incredibly self-righteous, but unlike their yin twins, they're not hypocrites by nature or disingenuous. They just expect too much, both from themselves and often others as well. Their disappointment can lead to them becoming misanthropic and hating the world, while their own shortcomings plague their minds and erode their self-esteem. They cast their confidence into the shadow. As a result, they tend to mistake people who have higher confidence for arrogance, and they'll dislike them for that. Demons attack these extreme yang types by filling them with self-doubt and butchering their already dented self-esteem. Since we're talking here of the third field, which is where the oppression stage takes place, it's a safe bet that voice to skull plays a significant role in this. The demon will constantly criticise the target and try and convince them that they're a bad person. It will place sexual imagery in their head and then call them perverted. It will access their memories and then attack them for something that they did wrong in the past, accusing them of being horrible people. It will tell them that their friends secretly hate them and wish that they were dead. It will mimic the voices of others and make it sound like they're talking about you. It's important to remember that this particular chakra is about willpower, because that is what the entity has to break in order to gain access to your heart and possess you. To do this, it must make you as oversensitive as it can, or conversely, as insensitive as it can. Someone of an extreme yang imbalance in this chakra is far more prone to oversensitivity than the latter. The extreme yin types, on the other hand, are likely to be insensitive and easily taken over because they have no real sense of who they really are. Since they don't know who they are, they have no way of knowing on a conscious level who anybody else is either. They will lack empathy. When it comes to this 3-stage attack, infestation, oppression and possession, extreme yang solar plexus types are the targets, because the extreme yins have no integrity with which to resist. So we can see a clear pattern emerging in terms of who might come under such an attack. First, the outer field must be damaged, and who knows what kind of technology could be used to achieve this, but minus any kind of technology, all it takes is an imbalance in one or both of the poles of this field, the crown above and the root below, and once that's out of the way, the process begins. Infestation involves causing a yang imbalance in the third eye and a yin imbalance in the navel. This unlocks the next field down, which allows the oppression stage to begin, and this involves causing a yang imbalance in the throat chakra and a yang imbalance in the solar plexus. This breaks the will of the target and unlocks the heart for possession. The pattern that emerges in this 3-stage process indicates that this particular process is aimed at the more strong-willed types than the passive. The passive don't put up much of a fight, so the gaslighting is not needed. They just fold. I'd place the New Agers in that category. This 3-stage process is specifically tailored towards strong-willed types who hold to their beliefs, their convictions, their principles to such an extent that when they slip up, as all people do, they feel a deep sense of failure. They beat themselves up and probably experience cognitive dissonance. So we're talking deeply religious types, not the social chameleons who pose as religious, but people who try so hard to be what they feel they should be that they end up shooting themselves in the foot. Let's take a look at how this happens.